Red Mesa, the name still tastes like dust and regret on my tongue, even after all these years. I remember the day I rode back in, the sun beating down on the brim of my hat, the familiar grit of the desert wind against my cheek. I'd left a boy, full of fire and dreams of a world bigger than this small, forgotten town. I came back a man, with a tin star pinned to my chest and a weight in my soul that the desert itself couldn't match. The town hadn't changed much. The same weathered storefronts, the same quiet desperation hanging in the air, but something was different. A shadow had fallen over Red Mesa, a coldness that had nothing to do with the coming night. It was the shadow of murder. John Hollis, a good man, a rancher who knew the land like the back of his hand, had been found dead. Shot in the back. A coward's work. His wife, Mary, was a whisper of the woman I remembered. Her eyes, once as bright as the desert sky, were now clouded with a grief so profound it seemed to steal the very air from her lungs. She stood before me at the edge of town, by the small, freshly turned plot of earth where John now lay. Her hands were clasped, knuckles white, her voice barely a tremor. She didn't ask for vengeance, she asked for justice. She asked me to find the man who had stolen her husband, who had torn a hole in the fabric of their lives. I looked into her eyes, saw the last ember of hope flickering there, and I gave her my word. As sheriff, as a man, I promised her I would not rest until John's killer was brought to justice. It was a promise I intended to keep, a promise that would soon become the heaviest burden I would ever carry. The investigation started like any other. I followed the tracks, asked the questions, listened to the whispers that skittered through the saloon like tumbleweeds. The trail was cold, a ghost in the vast expanse of the desert. The townsfolk were tight-lipped, their fear a palpable thing. They spoke of a phantom, a rider who came and went with the night, leaving only silence in his wake. Days turned into weeks. The desert kept its secrets close, and the memory of my promise to Mary became a constant nagging ache in my chest. Every sunrise felt like a failure, every sunset a reminder of a killer still walking free. I spent countless hours combing through John's land, searching for a clue, anything that the killer might have left behind. It was on one of those long, lonely afternoons, as the sun began to dip below the mesas, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, that I found it. Half buried in the sand, glinting in the fading light, was a silver cufflink. It was intricately carved, a unique design of a hawk in flight. My blood ran cold. My breath caught in my throat. I had seen this cufflink before. I knew it as well as I knew the lines on my own hand. It belonged to my brother Nathaniel. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Nathaniel, my younger brother. The wild one. The one who always walked the line between right and wrong. We had grown up together under this same sky, our bond forged in the harsh beauty of this land. He had left town years ago, chasing a different kind of freedom. One that I, with my star and my sense of duty, could never understand. I hadn't heard from him in years, had assumed he was a lifetime away. But this cufflink, this small piece of silver, was undeniable proof. He was here, and he was connected to John Hollis's death. Denial was my first refuge. It had to be a mistake. He could have lost it. Someone else could have found it. But deep down, a colder, harder truth began to take root. I started to piece things together, small, seemingly insignificant details that I had overlooked. The description of the phantom rider, tall, lean, rode a black stallion. Just like Nathaniel. The whispers of a drifter with a quick temper and an even quicker draw. It all pointed to him. The brother I had once protected, the boy I had taught to ride and shoot, was the monster I was hunting. The conflict tore me apart. On one side was my duty, my oath as sheriff, my solemn promise to a grieving widow. Justice demanded that John's killer answer for his crime, no matter who he was. On the other side was blood, family, the memory of two boys chasing lizards in the sun, sharing secrets under a blanket of stars. How could I be the one to put a noose around my own brother's neck? How could I look my mother in the eye again if I did? The star on my chest felt heavier than lead. A brand that marked me as both lawman and brother, forcing me to choose between the two. The choice was impossible, a betrayal no matter which path I took. I tracked him for 3 days, following a trail that only a brother would know how to find. He was hiding out in the old abandoned cabin by Crying Creek. The same one where we used to hide from our father's temper. It was as if he wanted me to find him, as if this confrontation was as inevitable as the sunrise. When I saw him, he was sitting by a dying fire, staring into the flames as if searching for answers. He looked older, harder. The dessert had etched new lines on his face, and his eyes held a weariness that went beyond his years. He didn't seem surprised to see me. He just nodded slowly, a sad, knowing smile playing on his lips. He didn't deny it. He told me the story, his voice low and steady. It was about a card game, a dispute over a piece of land. John Hollis had accused him of cheating. Words were exchanged, tempers flared. John reached for his gun. Nathaniel was faster. It wasn't a cold-blooded murder, he said, but a mistake. A tragedy born of pride and whiskey. I listened, my hand resting on the grip of my Colt, every instinct screaming. He was my brother, but he had taken a life. He had made a widow of Mary Hollis. He had broken the peace of this town. Justice had to be served. You have to come with me, Nat, I said, my voice hoarse. It's the law. He stood up, his eyes locking with mine. In that moment, I saw the boy I grew up with and the stranger he had become. You always did have to do the right thing, didn't you, Caleb? He said, his voice laced with a strange mix of resentment and admiration. He didn't reach for his gun, he just stood there, waiting. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The moment of truth. Brother against brother, law against blood. And then, it came. A single sharp crack of a rifle shot, echoing from the direction of the town. It wasn't close, but it was clear. It was a sound I knew well. It was the sound of trouble. A new trouble. A different trouble. Nathaniel and I both turned, our personal conflict momentarily forgotten, our eyes fixed on the distant mesas. The shot hung in the air, a question mark, a warning. It was a sound that signaled that my duty, our story, was far from over. The shadow over Red Mesa was larger than just one man, larger than my family. And as the sun bled out over the horizon, I knew that another promise would have to be made, another demon would have to be faced. The dessert was not done with me yet. Thanks for watching. Sheriff Caleb Donovan stood frozen beside the burned Hollis farmhouse, the sound still ringing in his ears long after it faded into the hills. Nathaniel did not move. He did not reach for his gun, nor did he run. He only closed his eyes, as if the past had finally caught him and there was no sense pretending otherwise. The wind carried the smell of ash and dry earth between them, heavy with everything they had never said. Thomas Hollis clutched his mother's coat, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed on the man who had destroyed his world. Caleb stepped forward without thinking, placing himself between the boy and his brother. It was an instinct born of years wearing the badge, but also of something deeper, a need to shield innocence from truths too heavy for young shoulders. Nathaniel looked at the child, and something in his hardened face cracked. I never wanted him to see me like this, he said quietly. I never wanted any of it to end this way. Deputy Harris and several townsmen rode into view, their expressions sharp with fear and anger. Word traveled quickly in Red Mesa, especially when blood and fire were involved. When they saw Nathaniel standing near the ruins, recognition spread through the group like a sickness. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs turned to accusation. Caleb felt the weight of their eyes pressing into his back, waiting to see which man he would be, sheriff or brother. That's him, she said, her words slicing through the air. That's the man who took my husband. Her strength faltered then, grief washing over her all at once. Thomas held her as tightly as his small arms would allow. Caleb looked at Nathaniel, searching his face for denial, for anything that might soften the truth. But Nathaniel only nodded once. She's right, he said. It was me. Shouts of rage filled the air, voices demanding blood instead of justice. Someone yelled for a rope. Another called for the gallows. Caleb raised his hand, his voice cutting through the chaos with the authority that had kept Red Mesa standing for years. No, he said firmly, not like this, not today. The men hesitated. They trusted Caleb, or at least they had. But trust thins quickly when grief sharpens into anger. Chains of guilt dragging behind him. Let them hear it, he said. All of it. He lifted his voice, steady and clear. He spoke of the night he rode drunk with bitterness, of the argument that turned violent, of the gunshot that ended a good man's life. Each word landed like a stone in Caleb's chest. Mary sank to her knees, sobbing openly now. Thomas turned his face away, unable to look any longer. Slowly, he removed the iron cuffs from his belt. His hands trembled as he stepped toward his brother. Their eyes met, years of shared memories passing between them in silence. I have to do this, Caleb said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Nathaniel nodded, I know. The cuffs closed around Nathaniel's wrists with a sharp metallic click that echoed across the field. It was the sound of a promise kept, and a family shattered. The gallows stood at the edge of Red Mesa, newly repaired, its shadow stretching long across the dirt road. Caleb avoided looking at it, but he felt it all the same. That night, the town buzzed with uneasy anticipation. Justice was coming, so was sorrow. He removed his badge and placed it on the desk beside an old photograph, two boys on horseback, smiling beneath a wide, endless sky. His hands shook as he stared at it. "There has to be another way," he whispered, though no one was there to answer. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the sound of a town preparing for an execution. For the first time in years, he was no longer running. He knew the morning would come quickly. What he did not know was whether his brother would find the courage to save his soul or sacrifice his own. As the lantern dimmed and Red Mesa sank into uneasy sleep, the line between justice and mercy grew thinner than ever. Dawn came slowly to Red Mesa, pale light stretching across the dirt streets like a final warning. The town was quiet, but it was not peaceful. Doors opened softly. Boots stepped into dust. Men gathered near the gallows without speaking, as if words might make the morning more real. Sheriff Caleb Donovan stood alone on the wooden porch of his office, staring at the sky. He had not slept. The night had been spent wrestling with memories, prayers, and a truth he could no longer outrun by sunset. His brother would be dead. Inside the jail, Nathaniel sat calmly on the bench, hands folded, eyes lifted toward the small barred window. For the first time in years, there was no fear in him. When Caleb opened the cell door, Nathaniel looked up and offered a faint, broken smile. "Morning, brother," he said softly. Caleb swallowed hard. "They're gathering," he replied. "You should eat," Nathaniel shook his head. "I'm ready." There was no bitterness in his voice, only acceptance. As the town assembled, Mary Hollis stood among them, Thomas holding her hand. Her face was worn from tears, yet something in her eyes had changed. She did not look at Nathaniel with rage anymore. She looked at him with exhaustion. The kind that comes after grief has burned through every other emotion. The preacher murmured prayers no one truly heard. The rope creaked gently in the wind. Before the execution could begin, Caleb stepped forward. The crowd fell silent. His voice was steady, but his eyes told another story. "Before justice is carried out," he said, "there is something you all need to hear." He turned toward Nathaniel. "Tell them the rest." Nathaniel hesitated, then nodded. He spoke of the men who rode with him that night, the gang that pushed him toward violence, the ones who lit the fire while he stood frozen in shame. He named them. He confessed everything, not to save himself, but to make the truth complete. The crowd stirred uneasily. This was not the clean ending they had come for. Mary stepped forward, her hands trembling. "Will hanging him bring my husband back?" she asked quietly. No one answered. She looked at Caleb. "Or will it just take another man from this world?" Tears fell freely now. Thomas squeezed her hand, his small voice barely audible. "Mama, I'm tired of losing people." Caleb felt the weight of that sentence crush his chest. In that moment, he understood what justice truly demanded. He removed his badge and held it up for all to see. "The law gives me the power to hang my brother," he said. "But it also gives me the power to choose truth over vengeance." Gasps spread through the crowd. "Nathaniel will live," Caleb continued, "but not free. He will turn himself in to the federal marshals, testify against the men who destroyed this town, and spend the rest of his life paying for what he's done." Silence followed, long, heavy, uncertain. Then Mary nodded slowly. "Let him live," she said. "Let him carry it." One by one, the anger in the crowd faded, replaced by something quieter. Something harder, mercy. Nathaniel was taken away in chains, not to the gallows, but down the long road east. Before he mounted the wagon, he turned to Caleb. "You saved my life," he said. Caleb shook his head. "No," he replied, "I saved my soul." As the wagon disappeared into the dust, Caleb stood alone, the badge still in his hand. He knew he could no longer be sheriff. He placed the badge gently on the gallows post and walked away. Weeks later, Red Mesa began to heal. Mary reopened her home. Thomas learned to smile again. And somewhere beyond the plains, a former sheriff rode quietly beneath the open sky, not chasing justice anymore, but finally at peace with it. The West would remember many men for how they pulled a trigger. But it would remember Caleb Donovan for knowing when not to. New wood replaced old, Laughter returned to the streets, and the gallows at the edge of town stood abandoned, its rope long removed, its shadow no longer feared. The town remembered what had happened, but it no longer lived inside that memory. Justice had come not through death, but through restraint, and the land seemed to breathe easier because of it. He rode where work was honest and words were few, fixing fences, breaking horses, helping strangers without ever asking their names. Most folks knew him only as a quiet man with a weathered face and steady eyes, someone who carried himself like a man who had already paid his debts to the world. At night, by the fire, he sometimes stared into the flames. Hearing echoes of a voice that once called him brother, he testified against the men who rode with him, the ones who had turned anger into fire and blood. Those men were captured, judged, and punished by the law. Nathaniel asked for no mercy for himself. He worked, prayed, and wrote letters he never expected to be answered. His final letter was sent not to Caleb, but to a boy who had once stood trembling in the ashes of a burned home. He learned the land and learned himself. Mary raised him with truth instead of bitterness, teaching him that pain could either poison a heart or strengthen it. On the day Thomas left Red Mesa to start his own life, he stopped at the place where the gallows once stood. He placed his hand on the old post and whispered a thank you, not to the law, but to the man who chose mercy when hatred would have been easier. Hats were tipped. Doors opened. Mary stepped onto her porch, older now, steadier. Their eyes met across the road. No anger lived there, no blame, only understanding. "You did right," she said softly. Caleb nodded once. "I hope it was enough." 2 names rested there now, one taken by violence, the other by time and consequence. Caleb removed his hat, holding it to his chest as the wind moved through the grass. "I kept my promise," he said quietly. "Not the way I planned, but the way it mattered." The West did not carve monuments for men like him. It remembered gunmen, outlaws, and killers. But in Red Mesa, justice was no longer measured by a rope or a lever. It was measured by a choice, a hard one paid for with sacrifice, silence, and the courage to walk away, and when to lay down the badge forever.